Yes. Oh, I like that. Let's start there. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. And it's so Canadian of you. When I say welcome, you hoot, you call, and you do this. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to those who are also online. Yeah, the Gathering Divergence Multi-Arts Festival Conference. This is a long name. We used to be the Gathering first, and then it was my sort of crazy brain that said that I think both movies panel that we do with presenting, showcasing artists, and having conversations all in one. Welcome. It's like the 10th year or something. It's a ridiculous time of the Gathering, but more importantly, I want to say welcome and also just recap yesterday. Yesterday was primarily for online, and what was really beautiful yesterday when we started the day talking about the importance of advocacy in artists understanding what it means to advocate, and not just about funding, but for their artistic practice. And someone actually mentioned that every single time artists are writing space, they're advocating. So beyond the things that we consider scarcity funding and everything, I really enjoyed this idea of how do we stand up and speak about our arts organizations and our artistry and our practice as actually advocates as well. Really, really beautiful. We showcase, and the beautiful thing of the online platform is that we're able to showcase artists from across the country. And so we are artists who were working in Newfoundland and the East actually share their work and talk about their practice. Then artists do a digital exhibition from as far as London. And what I love with CPAMO is our nurture of connections. And that artist I met while being on a panel at for TNU, talking about immigration and using the arts to talk about immigration and the needs of immigrants, new immigrants who come as artists and how the arts councils can support them. And I thought it was absolutely amazing to invite Camille from London who came to do the project here at Toronto because of funding and challenges of immigration, actually returned home after a year and did not achieve the process and the part that she wanted to in Canada. And again, it's the same things that I love with the Gathering and with the CPAMO that we're really addressing the inequities, the marginalization of, especially hip-hop artists. And of course, the day started with a beautiful grounding from Caroline, who spoke, as always, about the seasons and what spring means for the arts and what winter should mean for the arts, which is actually the other reasons we're working. So winter should be the time we shed, we rest, and concrete the work again, spring into the work in the spring. And it's always a beautiful thing to hear her speak because it shows where we also work with CPAMO in the counterpoint and parallel work between what is our colonial structural work and what is sort of indigenous hip-hop POC ways of working. And always interested in how those two things make sense. So welcome. And to get us grounded for today, again with our indigenous understanding, I want to invite my co-director. What's also beautiful is the first festival that we are moving into this co-director model where Erin and I are co-directors. My particular purview is creative programming and public engagement, so I can handle all the advocacy pieces, like the Canadian Arts Coalition, the larger advocacy pieces around funding and equity nationally. And then Erin is responsible for the convener of the entire organization, so it's organizational pieces, but also transformational change, which is our sort of for organizational change processes as well. So I want to invite Erin to give her grounding for the day.
Thank you, Kevin. Lovely introduction. So, good morning, lovely souls. Good morning. I'm so glad to be here with you. So as Kevin said, I'm Erin Jones, with a background in both art and organizational development. And I won't be here for the whole day with you just because I am on a healing journey. So I just don't want you to be alarmed. I will be with you here in spirit and online. But I wanted to just acknowledge the work that CPAMO does. I'm so pleased to see the artists that support us that we can work with, and I want to see us continue to do that. And thank you for the energy in the room, the energy that you're giving me this morning so that I can stand up and be here. So it's very fitting that today encompasses wellness for artists. The work we do is very important, but also it takes energy, and we need to make sure we feed our souls down. So with that, let me do a land acknowledgement as my brain and soul and body heal. You'll notice I'm going to refer to notes just because I'm not as wonderfully spontaneous as Kevin is, at least not right now. So as I speak to the land, I'd like you to reflect on the territory that you're living on. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're here in Takaranto. And think of where you are, where you live, and where you work as a way of sharing about the many nations that have existed and still exist in Canada. In Takaranto, we are in the territory inhabited by the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, who have an agreement with each other, a treaty. We also acknowledge that Toronto, Takaranto is covered by Treaty 13 and the Dish with One Spoon. Yesterday, this was beautifully acknowledged by Karen Loft. And these agreements are on how to have a relationship with the earth and with each other so that the earth can exist in perpetuity. The earth is important to us. Our land is healing. And without it, we cannot live. Let's take only what we need and no more, because we need to make sure that the earth can produce in perpetuity. I'd also like to acknowledge and celebrate the work and lives of the first artists, the first storytellers, and the first history makers who've been forgotten or ignored as time has marched on. We acknowledge these early creators that have lived on the lands that we now occupy, the histories of those that have previously cared for this land and the stories they told, the lives they lived, remain an integral part of our existence. Illuminating and amplifying their voices allows us to honor them. And I'd also like to acknowledge our host venue, East End Arts. They're committed to the ongoing stewardship of this land through waste-free programming and the encouragement of storytelling and art that engages with the landscape in our neighborhoods. CPAMO sees acknowledgement as an action in a way our work can begin to address issues of reconciliation with Indigenous artists and their practices. I'd like to say enjoy the day, and I will be joining you in shortly. So thanks again, everyone, and so pleased to see you both here. Thank you. I will make it. Thanks.
I'm beside myself. I'm multitasking. And I'm doing this on the fly, in all transparency. Where do I start? Where do I start when I think about a shape-shifting word of thinking about not a sector but an industry? What does it mean, as Andrew Walker from the PAA, which is one of our main lobbyists that we work with, talk about not a sector, but an industry? And as artists, we're to think about the industry, we're thinking about the entrepreneurship that's involved in the arts. We're thinking about the impact of those things. We're thinking about the things that we do, that the arts sector, the arts industry, provides a larger GDP to the Canadian economy than arts do. And so for me, I always think about the shape-shifting that is required in the arts, through arts organizations, and the impact of those things. but it's still very much based on a systemic structure that continues to marginalize so many people. Beyond race, beyond ethnicities, it continues to marginalize because it's asking for artists and arts organizations to fall into very linear, structured systems in a world where we do not respond in that particular way, where we are then asked to not be as responsive enough or reflexive enough because we're asked to put visions and project things into the future, sometimes to the detriment of organizations. And, you know, I want to start by moving with this idea of what is the now and what are the things we need to always be thinking about in dismantling inequities for the future in the arts industry. And if I look at the now, I look at the need for space, and we're coming from, of course, Toronto, where space is a significant challenge, where rent of those present spaces are becoming a significant challenge. And when I think about it in a larger systemic way, I'm also thinking about the council's funding the arts movement, not the arts workers that are actually supporting, more importantly, the army, that are not supporting the other aspects of the business components of it. I will go in many places, and I'll state the business components of it because I think it's really important. And I have no problem to say that the CRA is not working effectively for arts workers. As a non-profit organization, they're not supposed to run. But if we think of an industry, which other industry do we ask to not make a revenue or report for revenue for the betterment of their wholesale system? So for me, today's really beautiful and interesting because yesterday it started with this idea of sectoral awareness. And today it's about artistic development. It's about artistic development for artists and organizations. And we see that we're working within a system that continues to marginalize and undermine the very things that we are hoping to do, which is to provide impact to not just artists and arts organizers across the society. To a society that's changed, to a society that Canada still depends on immigration. And I marveled at these things because I think at the end of the day, it impacts the well-being of the artists and of the arts organizations. And it further impacts, as we've been talking about today as well, those who are aging themselves. I'm very frank with what I say, and I will not apologize for what I say. I'm very Jamaican in that way. We're focusing a lot more on youth in the arts industry than we are on many persons who are aging in the industry who supported the industry for many years. And it's a passion and it's a mantle I take forward because next year I'm 50. Yeah, I know I don't look it. But as I also age in the sector, I'm also thinking about how the industry in this sector is not necessarily going to support me in the future. And are there ways in which we can think about that support differently? And I'm not talking about awards or lodging. I'm talking about actually working through mentorship. I'm speaking on honoring the mature artists in our industry who have contributed significantly to where we are now and could contribute further to where we need to be in the future. And so for me, this is also an aspect of me because I feel like many of those mature artists are finding the grounding and the space they need to actually actualize themselves as mature artists in the Pacific. I'm looking over at Nova, a dear colleague of mine for so many years, as we talk about this idea of like care, that we've been talking about as I run a dance company as well, and so as an artist director for the dance company, I get tons of demands for me in my leadership role, and I often wonder then who supports the leaders. I'm very transparent in these things as I think about today. I'm also thinking about the fact that last week was a very time and sleep deprived week for me. Not just because the conference was this week, but also because there were so many reports and deadlines and so many things we had to do last week for granting, for funding, for other things that impacted both times. And I wonder how, and I've been asking this question, it's a prompt I want to throw out without answers. How do we begin to think about care and wellness for everyone within the arts industry? Every single person works with it. Because we also know that so many arts administrators are leaving the industry. We also know that those coming into arts administration are not effectively educated or taught about the industry they're coming into. And so I'm always taking big picture and then macro, micro analysis, because for me this is how I think, but it's also how I respond to the world that we're in. I want to go back to this idea of also how marginalization occurs for newcomer artists within the sector. And how are we supporting, again, the conversation we're broadening, how are we supporting those with care, modelers who happen to be dancers in the sector, or modelers who are artists in the sector. I often have provided open space in my studios. I learned a lot of lessons from my ethnic upbringing, I would say cultural, because Jamaicans are many people live in many ethnicities that make up that particular space, and I often say that my company should reflect where I'm from. But I'm often thinking that my company is reflecting where I'm from, then it should include baby in this space. Crying and making noise in the rehearsals, because that's the next generation. How do we learn about the importance of the arts if they're not actually a part of it, if they're not engaging with it? And I circle back to this idea of why in society, in industry, we tend to not have care open to think about having generations in this space. I often think about why funding does not fund youth engaged work. But those are the very same youth that will be coming to the industry later. And for a company, and for many hip-hop companies that looks at community, we have a problem. We have a challenge. Listener is smiling because she always say you're the problem for challenge. And I think the challenge find solutions to that particular challenge. And so I'm often thinking about that. How do we nurture generations within the sector? And why is that important for the continuance of the sector into the future? So I think this is also part of the inequities that we, as artists and arts organizations, have a beautiful role in broadening and thinking through. That's not necessarily tied to community engaged artwork and professional work. It's work. And when you're grown up in these particular sectors and in particular industries where everyone is around, how do you then work in an organization that does not allow for everyone to be around? Some of the beautiful things I can share as I come to a close is when I considered plateaued in Toronto in 2009, I decided to jump into this world of dancing in New York. I went to dance in this company that had, and still do to this day, mature dancers on stage with the younger dancers. And that company is called Fade and Dance. They go Fade and Dance. Garth Fade was a great for the line. But what were the lessons learned as younger dancers came into the space and saw more mature dancers was a sense of history, was a sense of legacy, was a sense of continuance. Because there were stories and there were things embodied in that physical memory that were shared through what I call vocal dance language. And I often then wonder, what is the need, and I pose this as my final thought in this keynote, what is the need for our arts industry to think differently in the future, to begin to impact things differently in the future? And some of those things might be resisting what we know as the past. And this is what, but we cannot forget the past, we have to understand it. And this is what Cornelius calls the critical organic catalyst in his essay, The New Cultural Politics of Difference. And if you have not, it's a beautiful green, so very heavy. And he actually championed artists in this relationship. He says the artists are the persons who were questioning, understanding the past, questioning where they are now for a better future. And I think this is the work that we do at CPAMO, and I'm really, really excited to be in a co-director role with Erin Jones on what the future of CPAMO can be, or what also the future of CPAMO can be with a collective understanding of the arts industry.